you. It dawned on me pretty early as I worked on this speech that the process of putting it together, of reflecting and synthesizing, looking backward and forward at the same time, it reminded me of a very similar speech I gave not too far from this auditorium as an 18-year-old in the chapel. I decided to excavate the Microsoft Word document with my chapel on it, buried in a folder on my hard drive. I hadn't read it in quite some time, and my initial reaction was one of shock and mortification that I learned, according to the document, I had played songs by Weezer and Jack Johnson as people entered the chapel. I did not feel too good about that today. Apologies if any of you are major Weezer fans, or even know who Weezer is, I don't know. After reading the full text in my chapel, however, what I became most interested in was that it was evident the person I had become by the fall of 2003, a few months into my senior year at CA, is not all that different from the person I am today in the spring of 2019. I spoke in my chapel about my obsessions with list making and maintaining order. I shared the ways in which those obsessions made me a difficult person to deal with at times, and I also wondered aloud what we leave behind and what we gain when we move from one place to the next. All traits of mine and larger questions that I certainly grapple with today as well. I was actually a little surprised reading it through that I was willing to be so vulnerable about my more, let's say, challenging traits. As part of my chapel writing process, curiously, I actually asked each of my family members to tell me what they would change about my personality, and then I shared those findings with the entire school of 400 people. But then I remembered that feeling of safety and inclusion, this value placed on both introspection and self-expression, as embodied by the chapel tradition and by the tenets of common trust and academic honesty, is the foundation of Concord Academy. It is its core. This institution, when I was a student here, and clearly still today, was a place that made you feel like your words were always valid, your ideas were always worth sharing, and that your emotions were not something to hide, but rather to protect and nurture. This is a place where I was able to play on a tennis team, act in a variety of theater productions on this very stage, run a student newspaper, and learn how to paint, and so many other pursuits. I wasn't necessarily great at all of it. Asked my mom about some of the paintings I had made, or tried to make her hang in various parts of our home, but I was given the license here to try. Don't worry, I'll be getting to Taylor Swift soon. But first, I'm going to try to channel my inner Oprah and do my best to be a little motivational and urge you to try not to take any of this for granted. I know it's probably hard to process now. That's my best friend's son over there. Hi, Lucas. I'm going to try to channel my inner Oprah, do my best to be motivational, and urge you, try not to take any of this for granted. This is an extremely magical place, which is something that became much clearer to me after I had left. When I meet with aspiring writers now, they'll often ask me what was the most formative place or experience that has had an influence on my career, or where I learned how to write. And I always, without having to think about it, answer Concord Academy. This is a place where I learned how to construct an argument, how to craft a joke, how to lead and inspire people, and also how to listen. I've always loved the symbolism that everyone enters this school and listens for 3 years, as every single student in the grade above them shares a piece of themselves in the chapel. And then, finally, after all that listening and absorbing and reflecting, before you move on to the next stage of your life, it's your moment to speak. See if this works. My closest friendships were also formed in high school. I just spent a week in Europe with my friend Janet, with whom I became inseparable within the first few days of freshman year here. Martha Kennedy can share tales of how we used to terrorize her with our not-so-quiet antics in the library. Two of my closest friends in New York now, Marissa and Liz, are both Concord Academy graduates as well. Marissa's here today with Lucas. You just heard him give his little oration. I have a hunch in about 15 years he might be up here on this stage performing himself. I guess it could just be coincidental or good luck, but I think the fact that I'm still absurdly close with my CA best friends a decade and a half later reflects the special nature of this experience. I guess this is all to say, I hope if any of you are feeling any anxiety right now about the future to any degree, a very normal state to be in, one I was in then and now, hopefully I have given you a little bit of a boost already. You're developing about as sturdy a foundation for the real world here as I could imagine anyone having. You've got the most supportive, open, wonderful people surrounding you in an environment where you're safe to figure out what it is you love to do and how to think about the world. There's a very good chance your closest friends now, the ones sitting right next to you, will be your closest friends for decades down the line. Okay, so I decided to put a photo of a New York skyline here because I wanted to mark a transition into adult life and I wasn't really sure how to communicate it visually, so skyline it is. I've lived in New York for close to 11 years now, and one thing I want to stress from the outset is even though I have achieved more than I might have anticipated in that amount of time, I still have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. And as my family, sitting right here, can attest, I'm constantly sending them emails asking for advice or questioning my decisions. My journey has been somewhat meandering. There's been a lot I wanted to try, and I've taken a few detours, perhaps inspired by the opportunity I had here to experiment in so many different arenas. But I think that taking that time to figure out what it is you want to do is very healthy and important. I think, not to sound too much like an inspirational quote you might come across on Instagram, there's no race to the finish. There's no great big rush. My mom likes to tell a story about how when she was bringing me around for interviews in kindergarten, she would tell the admissions officers extremely proud that her son Josh had started reading when he was just 1 year old. At one of the schools, the officer looked back up at her and said, "You know what? They all read eventually." My first job in New York, working as a consultant, maybe in one of those buildings, who has any idea, could, in retrospect, be seen now as something of a false start. But I think it was in fact quite instructive and helpful in setting me on my path. Even though what I do now in my job at Vanity Fair is very different, the skills I picked up working in a traditional office setting serve as a really great baseline. I learned how to make a PowerPoint, not that you would know it from the situation behind me. I learned how to work towards compromise in a business meeting setting, how to interpret a cryptically worded email from a boss, much more that became helpful down the line. The consulting job was at a brand identity firm where we helped companies develop their names, their images, visual systems, their logos. The projects that we worked on were often quite fascinating, and I couldn't believe there was an actual paying job you could have that involved sitting in a room with smart people for a week, brainstorming made-up names based on like Greek mythology or reality show characters for like a new brand of Hershey's chocolate bar or products like that. Branding is something I think about all the time in my work at Vanity Fair now as well, as someone who covers the world of entertainment and culture. Celebrities, influencers, politicians, branding of course becomes a huge question for all of them. For a singer, or model, or actor, an Instagram account is essentially a branding exercise, choosing what qualities about themselves they want to communicate or emphasize or project back to the audience, what aesthetic they feel best captures their vibe. Looking back now, I can draw a direct line between my branding education those 2 years to the feature I wrote for Vanity Fair in 2016 about how celebrities and politicians express themselves on social media, for which I identified and analyzed the behind-the-scenes players who strategize and sometimes did the actual posting on the celebrities' behalf. Look at the Selena Gomez graphic they made. It's like kind of wild. Okay, while I enjoyed the branding work and liked many of my coworkers, I had a deep sense at age 23 or 24, on a gut level, that this branding stuff wasn't what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life. It sounds cliche. This is the sort of thing you might hear an author character say in a movie, I feel like. But I've always just instinctively been a writer. It's how I interpret the world. It's been wired into my programming. It's what I've turned to again and again. When I was maybe 10, I launched my first publication, the Duboff Berkeley Family News, which I would type up and lay out on the gigantic desktop computer in our media room. I'd interview my family members about mundane events in our lives. I'd ask my dad if I could quote him on his thoughts about an Adam Sandler movie that we'd just seen, or I'd interview my brother about the donut he just ate. I wrote plays that I'd forced my brothers to act in. There was one I wrote called Push-ka-Push that remained something of a personal joke between my two brothers and me. It was a sort of metaphysical meditation on identity. There was a character named Dog the Mom who had to figure out if she was a dog or a mom. And then a character named Dad the Son who was facing a similar journey. I started a newspaper in 6th grade for my entire elementary school, and when I got to CA, I revived the Centipede, which became one of my most fulfilling experiences here. When I was editor-in-chief for my last 2 years here, I was able to map out a clear vision for the paper, creating an outlet for students to have the chance to express themselves and opine on campus issues. We came out with 16 issues over 2 years, including a special 40th anniversary edition. And We regularly receive feedback in the form of letters to the editor from the deans and faculty and students, which is very important to me. In my first issue, I was looking back the other day, we had 2 editorials, one advocating for the abolishment of the campus weekends requirement, which I hear are called community weekends now, for day students. Things change, I'll tell you. And one criticizing the way a few juniors have been disciplined following some inappropriate behavior at a school dance. I don't even remember what that inappropriate behavior was now. In college, I was the news editor for the daily newspaper, and I like to say now, even though I was technically a history major, that my real major was the newspaper. Writing, and I have a hunch a lot of you here as CA students have a similar passion yourself, whatever it may be, always felt not like a choice for me, but rather a necessity. It picked me. So now, let's flash back to Josh having just moved to New York. He's living with his 2 roommates in a cramped apartment in the financial district. He's working at this branding firm, brainstorming names for chocolate bars, and he can feel palpably the lack of writing in his life. At the end of college, I started a personal blog called Text Message in a Bottle, where I shared musings about my life and surroundings. There were a lot of lists, some anecdotes, observational humor, personal ruminating. I hadn't really expected to keep it going while I was leaving my real adult life in New York after college, but I found myself desperate to keep updating it. I'd get home from work every single night, change out of my formal work clothes, and sit down and write a blog post, envisioning in my head that I was like the lanky male version of Carrie Bradshaw. You guys know who Carrie Bradshaw is, I hope, right? Okay. There we go, that's what it looked like. One day, I was 24 at the time, I got an email from an editor at New York Magazine, which is one of my favorite must-read publications. She said a friend had sent her a link to that blog, and she wanted to know if I was interested in auditioning for their new night blogger position. I truly thought it was some sort of prank. It felt like something out of an episode of Gossip Girl. That anyone in the actual media world has seen this little blog, you guys can see what it looks like design-wise, has seen this blog I created on Blogspot. This is before Tumblr even. A blog where I'd upload odd photos of weird signs I saw on the street, would ramble about being lactose intolerant. This blog had led to a true dream job opportunity. So for a short period of time, I was auditioning for the New York Magazine blogging job at night while working the consultant job during the day. It was sort of like a much less exciting Clark Kent double life scenario. But it was also extremely clarifying. The consultant job was safe and stable and just fine, and I probably could have stayed at that job and ended up becoming a partner one day and having a completely wonderful life. The night blogging job was scary and weird and unstable, and yet, even as someone who can barely decide what to order for dinner without taking a poll of the entire restaurant, when I was offered it, taking that night blogging job was one of the easiest decisions I've ever made. I knew in my heart that's what I wanted to do. So it was that I embarked on a completely new chapter of my life. For about a year, I was charged with writing 10 posts a night for New York Magazine's website, 5 about news and 5 about entertainment. I started around 6 p.m. each night and would usually wrap up by about 3 or 4 in the morning. It was very solitary, to put it mildly. I'd usually be starting work in my bedroom, just as my roommate, Amanda, also a CA graduate, would be getting home from her normal hours day job. And I felt a bit like I was a solo astronaut each night, floating off into space on my own, while my friends and family remained on Earth, sleeping. I didn't get to see my friends during the week with those hours. There were a few perks, I guess, like being able to go to an empty movie in the middle of the day, being able to schedule a doctor's appointment whenever I wanted, wild stuff. More importantly, though, it was a phenomenal crash course in the world of the internet. I was scouring all kinds of news sources to come up with my 10 topics a night on my own. I was finding the photos, writing the headlines, and then setting my posts live without anyone looking them over first, which is kind of crazy to me in retrospect. While this was in some ways terrifying, it was a good lesson for me in just building confidence with my work. While there was a fair amount of low-grade panicking going on every night, I had to just learn to quash it, push it to the side, whatever metaphor you want to use here, and overcome it and believe in my output. I had to make a lot of quick decisions, something again I wasn't ever adept at. I remember at the beginning, I'd email my brother the complete text of blog posts that I was about to publish on the site. It would be like 1 a.m. and I'd send Sam something with the subject line, "Do you think the Nicole Kidman joke in this post is funny enough? I just can't tell." By the end of my time at New York Magazine, I wasn't bothering him nearly as much. I guess this is a good place to pause for a second, give another little nugget of advice. I don't often talk about my full career arc in this sort of formal way, and in the process of writing and reflecting, it's been very interesting and exhilarating to find the little links and connections of things. I noticed that in the junctions in my journey where I could sense on some level that I was not quite 100% thrilled with what I was doing, wasn't sure how to get out of the situation, to find some pathway that might be more joy-inducing. In almost every case, I've tried to write my way out of them, to remember what it is I love about what I do, and focus not on the stresses or whatever may have been bringing me down, but instead wholly on that passion, on that activity I enjoy the most, and let that guide me out of the darkness, so to speak. That's definitely the most spiritual idea I've ever tried to convey to a group of people. So when I was a consultant, that writing my way out took the form of this Texas and Duboff blogging, which is what led to the New York Magazine job and set my career in a different path. And then it happened again when I wrote my play, Scarlet Fever. There we go. I was at this night blogging gig and learning a lot, but I was also sort of going insane with a deranged sleep schedule, zero contact with human beings during the week. To make myself feel more productive, I would use my daytime hours I was awake to work on this play idea I had. I'd also catch up on episodes of Glee and go to the gym on occasion, but I spent most of my afternoons before work at coffee shops writing. When this play got into the New York Fringe Festival, I ended up leaving my job to work on its development and its staging. Writing, while wonderful, can also be a very lonely profession, of course. A lot of your time spent hunched over a computer screen, reading things over and over, mainlining coffee. So suddenly being in a rehearsal room surrounded by people and working with actors and thinking and talking through the characters I had created, it was a revelation for me. The play, as you can see, was called Scarlet Fever. It's about a young woman who moves to New York, starts dating a guy who she later finds out is Scarlett Johansson's twin brother, a real person, by the way, named Hunter. The play went up before I started working at Vanity Fair, but clearly I've always been greatly interested in the trappings of celebrity, the people who surround the famous person, either in their professional circle or as their blood relatives. I enjoyed the play experience so much that I ended up writing and directing a web series after it called 25, immediately featuring many of the same actors. The web series was about three 25-year-olds who were struggling to figure out what they wanted to do with their careers, how to balance that journey with navigating dating and their social lives, something I was very much going through myself living in New York at the time. Working on the show was extremely challenging, from trying to raise money via Kickstarter to spending a week bouncing from restaurant to restaurant in the East Village, begging them to let us shoot scenes there. But it was, for similar reasons, intensely gratifying and exhilarating as well, from the energy created from the collaboration of the cast and the crew. At one point during filming, on a stressful day, one of our makeup artists, who had pink hair, asked if she could dye my hair pink. And I, to my own shock, agreed. Anyone who knows me well can tell you how out of character that was for me. You probably all have this sense now, knowing me for just 20 minutes. But I often think about the sort of new plane of existence I reached working on the show. I feel like the pink hair can work as a barometer of sorts. Find that thing in your life, a person, a project, an adventure, that takes you to the place where you're willing to embody your freest, least self-conscious self. My brother Sam maintains watching me on set making 25 is the happiest he's ever seen me. Oh wait, here's the big reveal, the pink hair. Oh, there we go. I hope that I built it up enough. Okay. While I was working on editing 25, I was lucky enough to get a job at Vanity Fair, where I've worked for about 5.5 years now. Vanity Fair was an iconic magazine to me growing up, and it continues to remain surreal to me on some level that I write for one of our most influential cultural publications. When I was first hired in 2013, my editor at Vanity Fair said he was hoping I could live in the triangle of Marc Jacobs, Kate Middleton, and Beyonce. Another occasion on which I couldn't believe there was a job that existed with those parameters, and that is basically more or less the triangle I've been hanging out in since. I've had the chance at Vanity Fair to interview some of the most famous people in the world, but I'll never forget my first celebrity interview. I'm set to sit down with Sarah Hyland, who plays Haley, the bratty older sister on Modern Family, and I'm a wreck. I have 2 recording devices out on the table because I'm so terrified that one might not work. I'm texting my mom for moral support. I'm sweating. Probably changed my outfit 3 times beforehand. And then Sarah Hyland arrives, and one of the first things I say, letting it slip without even thinking about it really, is that as the oldest of 3 siblings myself, I tell her that my middle brother often like to make fun of me by suggesting I was the self-obsessed Haley of our family. I'll let them explain that later. I remember noticing that even sharing just a little jokey anecdote about myself with her like that, though, really helped to open her up, to establish a rapport between us, and that ended up becoming something I tried to bring to my subsequent interviews as well. These actors and singers and reality stars, they have to do so many interviews for their projects, and they get asked the same questions again and again and again. And my approach has always been to try to treat them, frankly, like a normal person. I remember I was interviewing the actress Jenny Slate a year or two ago over lunch, and she interrupted me to note how strange these sorts of interviews are, and that I asked her all these questions about different facets of her personal and professional life, questions one would never usually ask a stranger they were meeting for the first time, while meanwhile, she wasn't supposed to ask me a single thing. That observation redirected our conversation pretty naturally to her asking me all kinds of things about my life. We talked about our families and therapy and friendship in New York, and it turned into one of the best interviews I've ever done, gleaning fresh and interesting material as we went back and forth sharing. I'm often asked what celebrities are really like from having interviewed a number of them. One answer is that they all smell amazing. But the other is that many are, for the most part, exceedingly just like any of us. It seems silly to even express this out loud, but pop stars and actors and actresses and supermodels, they're just people. They're self-conscious and odd, and they can be cranky or anxious or funny. Another lesson I picked up in CA, but I always try to just listen to where the subject is guiding me. I'll prepare, I'll watch the subject's movies or television shows, I spend a lot of time immersed in their music, I write up lists and lists of questions in advance to prepare, but when I enter the interview room or restaurant or wherever it may be, I try as much as possible to just strip that all away and pretend I'm meeting up with Marissa for coffee. I'll ask how their day was, I ask where they're staying in the city. I do some nudging and guiding, of course, but I try to just see where they lead me, to read between the lines, to follow up on tossed off aside about a birthday party they went to last week, or brief tangents about a friend they saw in Los Angeles. Almost always, given some breathing room, they take me somewhere interesting. In 2015, the editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair at the time, Graydon Carter, gave me the opportunity to write the cover story on Taylor Swift. It was a career turning point, and it was pretty incredible to have the chance to profile someone who I admired so deeply. I was flown out to London, where I found myself on set for the Mario Testino cover shoot. It seemed like there were 80 people there, each one charged with either a glistening necklace to hold, or a small fan to wield, or a cold bottle of water to have at the ready. I can't believe I've been saying all this with the pink hair back here. There we go. I ate lunch with Taylor, that are seen there, in case you guys aren't familiar with what she looks like, and Mario, and I interviewed Taylor after the photo shoot was over. I was struck most with how self-aware and articulate she was about her work and self-image. This was in 2015, so we were in the throes of her Girl Squad mania, and before the whole Kanye West, Kim Kardashian melodrama and the other assorted scandals that would swirl around her thereafter. But she had such a canny sense of where public sentiment was about her, how different actions of hers had been interpreted, and most of all, a sense of humor and humility about herself. I prepared for weeks for this interview, but in the room with her, I was able to just be present with someone who was being as equally present. I know I just said that all celebrities are so normal when you meet them and so on and so forth, and Taylor did truly feel like she could have been one of my CA friends, heading down to one of the music rooms with me to play piano during a free A block. But I was also struck by the deeply abnormal logistical circumstances of her life. She had 3 bodyguards with her at all times. They'd have to check the bathroom in the hotel before she was allowed to use it. She couldn't sit near a window when we were talking in case someone saw her through it. Someone nearly had a seizure when they caught a glimpse of her in the hotel lobby. There was so much that we take for granted about our independence and freedom, and it's just not the case for her. There was a level of bravery to me in the upbeat sunniness she has in approaching life, given that constant, all-encompassing scrutiny and attention. The next day, I got to watch her perform at Hyde Park in front of thousands of people, and take in the way that this thoughtful, funny, quick person that I had spent the previous day with was now a superhero pop star on a global scale. While we all may not be operating on the public level of a Taylor Swift, we all have those 2 sides to us, don't we? We're just trying to find whatever our version of superhero pop star on stage is, that level of pure bliss, that state of the pink hair. There have been a lot of exciting challenges presented to me at Vanity Fair, assignments I didn't think I could do at first, moments where I wanted to make sure I was keeping things fresh for myself. I think I'm actually most proud of a weekly column I wrote for about 1.5 years that was structured as a fictional diary from the perspective of New York Mayor Bill de Blasio. Graydon had the idea for me to write the series, called the de Blasio Diaries, as a satirical, lighthearted franchise. They even found an artist in Europe who crafted an illustration for each diary entry each week. When Graydon first had me in his office and handed down this assignment, I was, let's say, a little anxious. I knew very little about Bill de Blasio, had no clue whatsoever how to write anything about him, let alone a humor column for which I was to pretend I was him. So I did what I might have done for Sally Zimmerly history paper assignment, and I got to work. I set up a Google alert, I read everything there was to read about him, I watched all the TV interviews he and his family had given, and then I set that all aside and embarked upon it essentially as a creative writing assignment. As I wrote the entries in his voice, but with my own style imputed on him. It was a really nice fusion of the screenwriting and playwriting I enjoyed with a more journalistic underpinning. About 2 years ago, I started a pop culture podcast with my Los Angeles-based coworker, Julie Miller, which was a chance for me to learn how to tell a story in a very different sort of format. I've noticed that Julie and I get very emotional and highly personal messages from our fans who listen to us, set to a different frequency from the responses I get to my written work. I think it has something to do with the way in which they listen to us on their commutes or on the treadmill at the gym, and they feel like they've become friends with us, that we become ingrained in their daily routines. If we miss a week, they may clear their frustration in the way you might if your friend didn't show up to a dinner date. I got to speak last night across the quad about where I see entertainment journalism and media more generally moving in the next few years, but I do think it's clear there will be so many new formats for telling stories, which I think is ultimately thrilling and encouraging. Everything does change so rapidly. When I was night blogging at New York Magazine, we didn't even have an Instagram account. Now it's the foundation of much of our Vanity Fair audience development strategy. But there will, I believe, always be storytellers and stories to be told, even if the way that look does shift. I'm not sure what will be next for me in my career. I've accomplished a lot of Vanity Fair, but I also feel the itch to try new things, to get scared again, to reframe my thinking. And I know that in order to figure it out and chart my path forward, I'm going to be opening a blank Microsoft Word document and seeing where it guides me. Thanks so much.